This is IATA.com. Primetime sports all the time.
And now from Times Square, crossroads of the World Wide Web, and sponsored in part by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, it's the Wrestling Observer Live with Dave Meltzer.
How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer. We've got an interesting afternoon here on Wrestling Observer Live because we've got Eric Bischoff as our guest in a little bit over a half an hour. We'll be talking about the current state of WCW and the pro wrestling industry and whatever you want to talk about. You can call up for Eric Bischoff at 1-877-392-3299 in about a half an hour. We also, of course, have Brian Alvarez here for the whole 2 hours. And for the opening segment, we've got Alex Marvez of the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel and WrestlingObserver.com, who's one of the leading football writers in the country. And we'll be talking a little bit about the XFL, which Brian doesn't want to get involved in that conversation because, Brian, do you hate football or you just don't watch it?
I just don't watch it. I have nothing against football.
Okay. And Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm just doing great. Yourself?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Better than the XFL ratings, right?
Better than the XFL ratings. Okay, well, we'll start.
Better than the XFL ratings.
Okay, Alex. I think everyone knew the ratings were going to fall from the first week, cool. But I think everyone was kind of figuring the fall would be somewhere between 25 and 35%. It turned out to be, for the NBC game, cut more than in half. The UPN game moved from an afternoon slot to a primetime slot. Still appears to have dropped about 33%. We don't have the TNN numbers in yet. TNN promoted the hell out of that first game. So the numbers may be higher this week than in future weeks. But overall, we've gone from, in the first week, XFL looking like a temporary big success, and here we are week 2, and all of a sudden everyone's going like, what can be done to save this operation?
It's an absolute disaster, Dave, and I think it really, the telecast Saturday night was so bad on so many different levels, starting with Stephanie McMahon standing in front of the helicopter, moving to the 18-minute power outage, and all the other glitches that they had. The product was subpar. The announcing was just the same lines over and over again. Jim Ross talking about smash mouth football. Jesse Ventura talking about the quarterbacks who don't slide until one of them slides.
And one of them slid at the it couldn't have been worse for poor Jesse, you know?
No, Jesse was absolutely terrible. He's taking some heat in his home state. There was a story in one of the Minnesota papers late last week talking about his approval rating dropping since he started doing these XFL games. And you really have to wonder if it's a matter of time, until Jesse jumps ship, if these ratings continue to go in the direction they're going. But I'll be honest, everything did not work. The WWF is so smooth when it comes to running a wrestling television production. I mean, they're almost seamless every time they do it. In this case, they had situations where microphones weren't working. The halftime situation, there was a little bit of a heated confrontation between Tommy Maddox, the Los Angeles quarterback, and the head coach. And I think they were trying to play that up as tune into halftime and see what happens. Well, they never went to it. I don't know if the microphones weren't working or they were told not to go in there or what happened, but you have a 10-minute halftime segment with The Rock repeating the same catchphrases over and over again and never getting into the locker room to show anything. They had a player get injured. He broke his leg. He spent 12 minutes on the field with that. It just went on. And, yes, the rating did pick up a little bit at the end because the game was competitive, but I think that was just a matter of channel surfing. People came back to it, but I know a couple of people I talked to, as soon as the Los Angeles game went out and they had no power, they just clicked it off.
Well, that's a lot of people did that because I think the rating opened at like a 5.4 and was down to a 4.7 real fast. It looks like it did a 5.1 in the overnights, which means it'll probably do about a 4.5. And WWF can justify it saying that that's what they sold the ads based on, but it's also a cut in half. The UPN game did a 2.8 in the overnights, which indicates about a 2.0 when the national number comes in tomorrow, which is a full point below what they had promised advertisers in that formula, which was actually a 4.5 to a 5.5 on NBC, a 3.0 on UPN, and a 2.5 on TNN. And I'm doubting they may get the 2.5 for the first week on TNN just because it was promoted so heavily. But if they're getting a 2.0 in prime time on UPN, the odds are they're not getting close to that on TNN for an afternoon game on a Sunday.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, that was the whole thing. If they could start strong and just keep some of the momentum going, then maybe they'd be able to hit those target numbers. But I don't think anyone expected the bottom to drop out the way it has. And I think you saw a little bit of that desperation come out last night at halftime of the UPN game, or the Memphis game. Jerry Lawler was there. Out comes the cat, who takes off her trench coat, and boom, she's in a pretty revealing bathing suit. I mean, for them to start doing things like that already, and I'm pretty sure they're going to plug that tonight on Raw, really shows to me that they're just so desperate at this point, they don't know what buttons to press.
Okay, but now, so by Sunday afternoon, they had heard the number, okay, but they hadn't heard the UPN number when they did that game. Now it's Monday. They got to do Raw and SmackDown the next 2 days, and Vince McMahon's got to worry about something because theoretically those numbers probably aren't going to get any better next week. And basically, I have heard very few times in television, I'm sure it's happened, where a show goes from, especially when you have a 6-network race or a 5-network race, depending on the night, where a show goes from being the number 1 rated show 1 week to the last place show on 2 straight nights the next week.
Well, it was a gimmick that didn't deliver. I mean, it was obvious people bought the gimmick. They bought all the advertising, all the media blitz, drew that huge number, and people tuned in. It's like looking behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz and finding nothing there. And that's really what the XFL turned out to be. It didn't revolutionize football. And that, I think, was the whole basis of Vince McMahon's promotional campaign. It didn't do it, and now what does he do? Because he's left with some terrible football. I mean, they can't build around the game. They've got to build around gimmicks, and the question is, what type of gimmicks can you go to now that's still going to keep your audience of football fans who are going to watch whatever type of football's on there, and maybe draw in some WWF fans? They're in a really tough spot right now.
Well, I mean, the problem
half of the show tonight is going to be XFL promotion.
They can keep doing it, but I just don't, you know what I mean? I don't know what good it's going to get them. I don't know and I asked Dave last night, we were talking on the phone, and I said, well, at what point do they put a match on? You know?
Yeah, but you
put
a match on.
From my standpoint, I don't watch football, and I never have, and nothing that they've done on Raw has made me want to watch the game. So, I mean, is it really necessary to promote it on that show? Are they really going to get some wrestling out of it?
It's their only vehicle. Without that, they're extinct. Yeah. Without promoting it to wrestling fans, they're extinct. I mean, because they didn't get over to football fans to any degree. Obviously, they did get over to wrestling fans who watched it once that Saturday and then never watched it again. I mean, the key was, they hooked them and then they didn't deliver enough wrestling. Yeah, they didn't deliver enough wrestling personalities or whatever. And then when they had the other thing, like last Saturday night, they had The Rock out there, and The Rock is doing a promo, and then he just pauses and goes, they're chanting The Rock's name, and then you kind of hear this murmur, but you do not hear a chant. And then they focus on the stands, and everybody's laughing. And all of a sudden, it was like, not only have they, it's the first time that The Rock looked like a fool ever on television. I mean, in his entire life. I mean, that guy has the crowd in the palm of his hand, and the world in the palm of his hand, quite frankly. And all of a sudden, he was taken out of his element, and he looked silly.
Dave, I think he sounded bad, too. I mean, he had nothing to say. And he just sounded so programmed, and I know that he's a great show for Vince McMahon, but my
God, all are.
He really sounded, dumb. And he's not a dumb guy. But he had absolutely nothing to say about the game. And when they started running long with the interview, you could tell, Ross was struggling for anything to come up with. They couldn't do their stage theatrics with Ross and Ventura. That never came about. So, you're right. I don't know what they can promote at this point, other than Vince make it desperate and put some more wrestling on the show and just hope that some people tune in, because he's got to do something to save face on this rating.
And Dick Ebersol, too.
Oh, Dick Ebersol, my God. People told him when he came in, what are you doing? This is a guy whose network handles the Olympics. And you look at what's happened now, he's a laughingstock. For the ratings to drop this bad from week 1 to week 2, it just doesn't bode well. I don't know how they're going to increase audience.
I don't know. They're going to obviously having some major meetings in the next couple of days. What were your thoughts as far as, on SmackDown and on their website, but especially on SmackDown, they teased the idea, Jim Ross and Jesse Ventura, those guys couldn't warm up together if they were cremated or whatever Jerry Lawler's line was, of Jim Ross, Jesse Ventura, doing shtick. And then when the game started, they did anything but. There was no sense at any point of any tension between the two. They worked together like they were friends, and they're both professionals, and they can do that. But they also, as a team, I'm watching this game. The number one thing in my mind, aside from the fact that, there's a lot of drop passes and things like that, but it was a very exciting game.
Also, Rashawn Sheehy is from Watts, Dave.
Yeah, I know, I heard that. And well, then they did the pro wrestling angle with the wife. This was no, and I don't even know what the story was. It was Scott. What's his last name?
Scott Milanovic. His wife.
Scott Milanovic. Okay.
Yeah, his wife.
So they opened the baby. Okay, his wife is about. They open the show. Stephanie McMahon's there with this helicopter. The wife is about to have a baby. Jesse Ventura says she's 5 days overdue. Stephanie says she's 4 days overdue. Okay, that's fine. And it gets better. They have this helicopter that's flying in the background outside the stadium, and Stephanie McMahon goes, in case she gives birth or she has to go to the hospital, this helicopter is going to take her from the stadium to the hospital. It's right there ready. So that's like the big drama. Stay tuned. This is our human interest story. Then they interview Scott on the sidelines later in the game, and in the interview it comes out that his wife is at home. She's not even at the stadium.
At least he didn't say we don't know who the father is. That's next week.
And also, I just want you guys to know that helicopter was actually for Vince to escape when the thing started to bomb.
Well, the other thing also is we've heard all kinds of. I have heard so many different stories about a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes, and there may be some scandals breaking soon in that league, in a lot of different ways. So there's just there's it's going to be a lot more embarrassing for NBC. See, either it's just going to go down because the football isn't going to carry it, but it'll go down with not dignity, but some as much dignity as NBC can save out of this, or they're going to go in the other direction, and Vince will go in what he knows best and destroy NBC's dignity, and then now you get this real fight. How far is NBC going to let it go? How far is Vince going to want to push? I mean, it's one thing when you're both successful and you can live with each other's idiosyncrasies, but when you're in a failing operation, if this is what it turns into be next week, you're going to have some people who are going to have a very difficult time getting along, I think.
And I think the blow to Vince McMahon's reputation through this whole thing is just enormous. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, before this thing started, was regaled as having this hotline to the young generation, and he was the future of entertainment and sports entertainment. He's a renaissance man for the 22nd century, whatever we're in, and 21st century. And instead now, it's obvious that he cannot connect on any sort of product outside of professional wrestling. This is what this guy does. He's great at it. He's the best there's ever been. But that being said, every other project that Vince McMahon has gotten involved in has flopped outside of wrestling, and this is another one of them.
Unless it's wrestling related.
Exactly.
Theme songs of wrestlers and stuff. He's been able to sell records based on that.
But I mean, when it's not related to pro wrestling, Vince McMahon is just an average Joe.
Yeah. I think that this is going to be. I'm wondering also as far as the fan base of the WWF, because to them, Vince McMahon is kind of a god of entertainment to them. He really is, and he is never. I mean, those of us who followed Vince McMahon for 20 years, we've seen his ups and downs. He's had his good periods, his bad periods, and in wrestling too. He's had his ups and downs in wrestling. But to people who jumped on 1998, they have not seen any of those down periods. They never saw the World Bodybuilding Federation. They never saw him try to promote. What do you mean?
He's never seen this either. I was just thinking about that.
That's true. He jumped in. That's right. But I mean, it's a whole generation of wrestling fans that have never seen Vince fail, and when confronted, and it's interesting because as we've seen in the last week, when they're confronted by critics, they really get their hair up and everything like that. And I think sometimes the critics of the league were a little bit too hard the first week. I think they picked on some things that, if it had not been a wrestling promoter doing it, they would not have picked on. But at the same time, the big fight the first week was numbers versus taste. This week, the critics have the numbers and the taste argument. And what happens to that wrestling audience that believes so strongly in Vince, that Vince could not fail, that Vince is the man with the Midas touch, that Vince should run for president, and he's got the biggest venture he's ever done publicly, because this football league to the media is much bigger than wrestling, even though wrestling's really bigger. And it's not looking, all of a sudden it's gone from the penthouse to the outhouse in 1 week. How is that going to, and then also how's it going to affect the wrestlers themselves? Because, if the league goes down and their payoffs go down, and Vince McMahon has to spend more time solidifying this football league and less time on wrestling, which again will hurt the wrestling product, there's just a lot of long-term repercussions to this.
What did the stock do today, Dave?
Probably went up.
I didn't get the number. No, I know it was in the 15s the last time I heard, but I haven't heard a final number on it.
Wow. It was at, 16:33 at close on Friday, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's got to go down. I would think even more tomorrow, but then again, who knows with the stock? I mean, the stock's so funny. Yeah, I know, like Brian said, it'd probably like go way up because everyone will go, well, the bottom fell out, now we should buy the stock.
Right. I think the other thing is that when you talk about this project, the XFL project, and the mainstream, Vince has a couple other irons in the fire also. He has the Tough Enough series coming up. He's got that Manhunt show. And you really have to wonder if advertisers are going to pay attention. You got to think they are to the XFL's failings and think, well, why should we go ahead and advertise on this product when the XFL with all that hype couldn't keep an audience? What's to let us think that this WWF endeavor is going to do the same thing? That's a really tough thing.
Well, the Manhunt thing scared me as far as because I just see it as at least with the football with a wrestling backdrop, if that's what he was going to do. I mean, that's sort of something that he knows, but when it comes to producing television that isn't, like dramatic television or whatever Manhunt's supposed to be, I was really scared of that, because that's not going to get the wrestling audience.
It's not true that David Schultz is a special consultant, is it?
And then, Tough Enough, I don't know, I mean, you get these guys, I mean, who knows? It's just like such a ripoff of like that MTV show, and it's like, once you're ripping off an established show, you're already, with a wrestling thing, and I don't know, David Taylor and Taz. I don't know. It's really hard. We'll see. There's one thing. Watching guys practice really bad wrestling is okay on a 3-minute newscast, but not for like, a half-hour television show for like how many weeks it's supposed to be.
Right. It doesn't have to work that like they work everything else. I mean, it'll have to be, the Survivor-type work. And I don't even know how big a part wrestling is going to be in that, to be honest with you. I could see in a 22-minute show 4 minutes of wrestling. If they want to delve into personalities and make it the real world.
Well, hopefully they get some guys that are interesting and better than some of those guys that are in those clips.
Oh, yeah, that has been that's been painful to watch. And you know what? I think that's some of our audience. If you think about it. I mean, in all honesty, it's like when I go to a wrestling show and, it's in Fort Lauderdale and I realize these are the people that read my columns sometimes. Wow.
Yeah, some of them. You can't stereotype because there's some very, very smart people that watch wrestling and there's some people who aren't. But you can say the same for hockey and football, too.
Yeah.
I think Alex can actually say that more for writing like a syndicated newspaper column as opposed to The Observer, which is targeted towards a different audience.
Yeah, you're right. And it's sometimes I just wonder what people are reading or what they're thinking. And it's like that with football, too, and having to deal with some of that. The sports audience, it's just amazing. I think a lot of it is, unfortunately I'm going to say this on the show, talk radio in a lot of ways. And that's just opened up the floodgates in a lot of ways for a lot of people to express opinions and for sports hosts to express opinions that aren't true or aren't educated. And it's just opened up a whole new world for sports. It's really scary, actually. Sometimes we have to even follow rumors from people that call up on shows and say they heard something, and if our boss is listening, we have to go chase it. Scary.
Yeah, sounds like something we do all the time. Actually. What do we have here? Hold on. Okay, for Nitro tonight, we have a couple cruiserweight matches. Lash LaRue against Yun Yang. Billy Kidman against Alex Skipper. Then we got Chuck Palumbo against Sean Stasiak. Dustin Rhodes against Rick Steiner, which might be a U.S. title match, but whatever they do exactly, it's going to set up a U.S. title match for the pay-per-view on Sunday, the angle they're shooting. And Cat against Lance Storm, which is the pay-per-view match from Sunday, and they're doing it tonight, which actually we've seen quite a bit of lately.
For the commissionership?
I do not know. I would presume. For Raw, the matches announced so far is Rock versus Rikishi, which is, if Rock wins, then Triple H gets to pick the stipulation, right?
Yeah.
If Rikishi wins, then Austin gets to pick the stipulation for their match at No Way Out a week from Sunday. Undertaker and Kane against Edge and Christian. The winning team gets a tag team title shot at the Dudleys at No Way Out. Chris Jericho defends the Intercontinental title against Eddie Guerrero. Hardys and Lita against Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, and Terry. And the long-awaited Triple H match with Billy Gunn, based on...
See how good Hunter is tonight.
We really will. We really will. Let me go through the poll here very quickly. This was for the weekend. Which of these products one has the best chance to make it in the United States on pay-per-view? Pride, 31%, EMLL, 8%, AAA, 8%, New Japan, 28%, None Have a Chance, 25%. The question for today is, at the beginning of the year 2002, which means January of 2002, the same time that we have to predict who the WWF champion is going to be for that British thing. How many wrestling companies will be doing profitable regular pay-per-view shows in the United States? A1, B2, C3, D4, and E more than 4. Okay.
How are they doing that betting? Is there like a cutoff date?
I don't know how long they're taking the bets, but it's whoever holds the title on January 1st?
It's like December 31st, I think.
Or December 31st, yeah.
So can you like vote December 30th for whoever's champion on that day? Like if there's no house shows that night?
I think they'll probably cut it off probably July or August.
Okay.
Maybe even earlier than that.
What? Do they have odds for XFL for next year?
You mean of it being alive?
No, just
Dad?
Yeah, what the Orlando Raiders' chances are, odds of getting in the Super Bowl. We doing that as a poll this week?
Getting in the Super Bowl?
Yeah,
They're not going to get in the
Super
Bowl.
Whatever it is.
They have odds like that in Vegas. Vegas has odds on all the teams and everything. Yeah.
I know they have that. I'm just wondering about for next year because I don't think it'll be around.
Who knows? Who knows? Vince McMahon is not going to give up without a fight. It's not going to be one of those things where, like it's too many losing weeks and he just goes, oh, well, it was a nice try. See you later.
Can't. You know what's going to be interesting, though, is when the NFL goes ahead and steals a lot of his ideas. I mean, that they...
Well, only the good ones. I don't think he's going to steal most of them because most of them haven't turned out to be that good.
Most have been bad, but I do think they'll probably have more intimacy. I would have to think that they're going to probably get some cameras on the field, or at least close, I think, from a camera standpoint, and maybe from some of the player standpoints. I think they're going to take Vince's best stuff and try to manipulate it to be their own, which is going to steal a lot of the gimmick that's supposed to be the XFL with the original coverage.
One of the things that looks so goofy to me, and it probably shouldn't, is seeing that guy in the football helmet holding a camera running down the field during those breakaways. Right on the screen. That just looks so weird.
It is weird.
Channel 4 in the UK got some heat today, and I think they were fined over airing a segment of Raw in October. Remember the segment where Rikishi smashed up the car and threatened to hit Jim Ross with a sledgehammer?
Yeah.
What's it called? The ITC, which is their regulating agency in Britain, said that that was too much for live television, and they basically said that Channel 4 claimed that the scenes were transmitted because the sledgehammer was not used against a person, it was used against a car, and because Rikishi was at the end persuaded against using it on Jim Ross. The report said that on reflection, all those involved agreed that this judgment was wrong and the scene should never have aired. The station has since had talks with its staff to remind them that they need to adhere to guidelines. Basically, in the UK, the deal was, since it was away from the ring setting and it was using a sledgehammer, they considered it too violent for television because it was a show that a lot of kids watched. They're a lot more permissive when it comes to sex on television than we are here, but they're...
Isn't there nudity on TV all the time?
There's frontal nudity. They're more permissive when it comes to sex, but they're less permissive when it comes to violence. I mean, I remember in the 90s, WCW used to send Worldwide over there, and I mean, it used to end up being like a test pattern. They would, edit out every foreign object shot, every outside interference for a while there,
I remember when you think about it, though, violence probably is worse than just some nudity.
It's all the standards that you're brought up with.
Yeah, it's just like in America here, you never see it on TV, so it's like, oh my God, how can they show that in another country and not some dude hit another guy with a sledgehammer?
Yeah, I mean, the sledgehammer stuff's pretty hard,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, before we let Alex go, I want to get to a couple of these emails. And it says, this is from someone who goes, Dave, I guess you overestimated Vince McMahon's intelligence and marketing savvy. Football is not that easy. You've compared it to college football, but you underestimate the tradition and emotional ties to these schools and programs. I don't think I ever compared it to college football. I just said that college football exists, and it's not at the NFL. It's from Adam, who goes, regarding the XFL ratings, how high were the ratings for the NBA All-Star activities? It's a high-profile, once-a-year event attracting the same demographics, and I assume it had some impact. I didn't check what the... I don't know what the activities did. I don't even know what the game did yesterday. Game could have hurt the XFL a little bit. Let's see. Is Super Crazy debut? No, not at all. Is Super Crazy debuting tonight? No. I thought you were too hard on Jesse Ventura as far as Schilling goes. We both know what his job is. When Ross was blasted for being overexcited, you rightly pointed out that is what is expected of him. Let's see. This is Brian has made some interesting comments regarding Stu Hart and stretching guys. It's accurate that when guys have gotten stretched by Stu in recent years, they have basically allowed Stu to do whatever to them. Well, he is 85 years old.
Yes.
Notwithstanding, Stu was a tough guy in his day. He stretched a buddy of mine a while back, and my friend said that a blood vessel in his eye burst. My friend said, and others have said the same thing, it was very painful, but also an honor to be worked over by Stu Hart.
That's just like being slapped by an Okie. I'm sure you can pop a blood. My grandma could pop a blood vessel if Stu Hart showed her something to put a guy in. I'm just saying, I'm not sure.
No, I don't know. I don't know. If you don't have a certain amount of tendon strength, you can be put into submission, and it's not that painful.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you have to have some power to make a lot of these holds work.
Yeah, my argument is just, how tough was Stu Hart really? If he was not down in the dungeon with a guy who thought it was going to be an honor to have a blood vessel popped by this guy, and it was someone that really wanted to give Stu a pounding, what would have happened? That's just my question.
It depends on the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone ever said that Stu was the toughest guy in the world.
And I'm not saying he wasn't tough at all either. I'm sure he was. He'd probably kill me at 85. But I'm just saying that a lot of times Stu does stretch people. I'm sure that it wasn't a competitive situation starting out.
Well, the thing also on that is like when it comes to how tough any of these guys were, we really don't know because we don't. It's all myth.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even when we talk about Strangler Lewis and all that, it was a work then too. Mm-hmm. I mean, people have their opinions and they trained with each other in the gym, but there are guys who are great gym fighters, but when it comes to a real fight, in a real fighting situation, they may not be that good. I mean, just as an example, the Lions Den guys, I mean, to them, Frank Shamrock was never anything special because, they were never going full-on fighting, and, they were mainly wrestling, and wrestling is the weakest part of Frank's game, and you don't do striking full-on, and when you go for the submissions, you're not trying to hurt the other person, which was one of his strengths. So, to them, Frank was never the king of the Lions Den by any means, but then when it came to actually proving in combat, he fared much better than any of those fighters ever did.
Yeah, and it all depends on the game. I mean, look at Steve Regal in the Carnival. I mean, he'll say himself, whenever I saw someone get in the ring that might be a problem, I just kicked them when they were coming in. There were a bunch of drunk guys, and a bunch of fat guys at the Carnival eating corn dogs or whatever. I mean, it's not like he was sitting there with UFC caliber competitors and just pummeling them in a ring.
Yeah.
Then he goes, Steve Regal's not a tough guy. He'd kill me too.
Yeah. He goes, was Stu one of the toughest guys in his day? He goes, I really don't know. He was likely tougher than most. He was a good amateur wrestler, and he definitely humbled numerous people over the years, both in his day and in his senior years. This is from John McMullen. This is more about the Titan Gate stuff. I didn't hear your reply. Okay. As far as Vince fixing his federal trial, I guess nobody blatantly ever accused Vince McMahon of doing it, but the implication was that Laura Bravetti's husband did her bidding, certainly implied to me that Vince was fully aware of the scheme and okayed it. The U.S. government does not take being embarrassed lying down. I would have imagined anything improper ever emerged from the story. Bravetti would have been targeted by the Justice Department or at least disbarred. If they could prove it, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Okay? You have to be able to prove that stuff. I could even buy the story if it was a local or state trial, but to give Bravetti, her husband, or even Vince McMahon the credit to pull off something like this is ludicrous. I was at the trial, and let me tell you something. It's not ludicrous. I mean, the guy, listen, Marty Bergman? I mean, he approached me. I mean, I know this is a real story, guys. He approached me saying he was from 60 Minutes, trying to find out what, I knew, who the witnesses were against Vince. So think about this. The husband, secret husband, nobody knew they were married, okay? The secret husband of Vince's attorney goes to the number one witness in the trial, Emily Feinberg, okay? And goes to her and basically talks her into being, him being her agent to put together either a movie deal or a book deal on Vince McMahon. And then, they talk about, like, what she knows, what she doesn't know. Obviously, that's what you would do with your agent, right? And then all of a sudden at the trial, Laura Bravetti has, like, this most incredible case of ESP and picked her apart on the witness stand like nothing that you would... I mean, I was there live. I saw it, and I'm just going like, what an awesome attorney Laura Bravetti is. I mean, I was thinking, like, she knows everything. It wasn't until, a year later when I find out she's married to Bergman, is a secret. And Bergman's this woman's agent. It's like, now don't tell me that nothing fishy happened. Because I know it did. Okay? Now, whether Vince McMahon was involved, I have no idea. And and in the stories that came out, and there were several stories in the New York papers, one in Village Voice, one in the New York Post, about Bergman, I mean, they pointed to Bergman doing several trials. It was not just Vince's trial. It wasn't like Vince McMahon, was the only one. And even, and the government still didn't have the evidence against him. I mean, that's the reality for those charges. I mean, so I'm not saying that the verdict was changed, but the idea that this didn't happen, okay, that nothing like this could have happened, it's not possible, I don't buy that. Somebody is gone there. Is that Brian or Alex? Alex is gone? Okay. Anyway, Alex is gone. Okay. Let's see. Okay. My point is the allegation was not only outrageous, but more importantly, incomplete. The mere appearance of impropriety does not always indicate impropriety, but the appearance can sure make a good story. That doesn't mean that Pravetti's husband didn't portray himself as something he's not and engage in reckless behavior, but to call him the fixer gives him too much credit. Sounds like an investigator with few scruples, and unfortunately the legal system is filled with them. As for Tom Cole, I too believe he's telling the truth. I just find it hard to believe McMahon knew about it. Logically, he had too much to lose, and why would he be protecting why would protecting two obvious deviants be in McMahon's interest? Now, granted, criminals don't often act in logical ways, but it's a stretch to me to think he knew about such behavior and through his disinterest encouraged it. I don't think that Vince McMahon ever encouraged it, but and if anything, he went to Mel Phillips at one point and discouraged it, but it did happen, apparently, and he didn't. I mean, I don't know that he went and stopped it. I mean, Terry Garvin was there until this thing broke, and then, Terry Garvin had to resign. But, I mean, I don't know what Vince knew as far as factual things, but as far as rumors and everything like this, I don't want to say everyone in the company, but, I mean, all the wrestlers had heard all those stories, and they all assumed that they were true. So to say that Vince McMahon had no knowledge that some of this stuff could happen, there's no way that that's true. Now, whether he knew specifics, that I have no idea. Okay. Where are we? Recently, the wrestling community saw how far a sexual predator can go for years without being indicted with the Jim Thompson story. Is that an indictment of his superiors at the newspaper they work for? That's an interesting case. I don't know that it's the exact same thing. I don't know what was known. I mean, I know people in the wrestling community after it happened. I knew Jim Thompson, and I had no idea of any of this stuff. And I knew people who knew Jim Thompson well, who had no clue whatsoever of this stuff. But then there were also people who called me up in the wrestling community who go, oh yeah, people around wrestling, they'd heard these stories. So again, I don't know, and I don't know what the newspaper knew. But there's also indications the newspaper may have known some stuff too, because I think there was some stuff with hotlines and stuff where they were kind of uncool. So there may be something to that. And he goes, anyway, I think my main premise is correct. Vince McMahon may be a despicable human being, but his accusers have been so rabid and at times ridiculous in their accusations that it's easy for him to position himself as a martyr. This enables him to deflect serious criticism on the real problems with his company more easily. I do agree with that premise. And that's why whenever it comes to accusations or points being made by people both pro or con, I always say you got to take each point separately. You can't take everything as a group because there's going to be, in every argument, there's going to be flawed points on both sides. So if you're just sitting there trying to defend your viewpoint and picking to the flaw of a point on the other side and using that flawed point to eliminate the valid points, that's bullshit argument, and that's an argument that's done all the time by people on both sides of every argument. And that's why I'm saying, like, you got to take each point as it is. You can't take them pretty much as a group. Okay. Anything you want to add to that, Brian?
Nope.
Okay. Where was I? The WWF stock finished at $15.36 a share today, so it was down $1.60, I believe. Let me see what it is. Yep, exactly that. And also that betting was closed, for the WWF title. The betting closed on January 31st.
Wow.
Just so you know that. Okay, so that's that.
And I was going to vote.
Yeah.
Or bad.
Yeah, it's too late. You can't vote for Benoit. I'll tell you what. Well, that's another story. Let's see. Do you know if Lita's appearance on Off the Record will be a one-on-one interview or she part as a panel guest? I don't know.
I heard it was one-on-one.
It is one-on-one? Okay.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. Just a reminder, Dave, there are no fair catches in the XFL. I thought I'd let you know it, considering the XFL announcers let us know about it every single punt. Okay. Let's see. You cannot compare Stu Hart at the age of 85 to Stu Hart in his day. This man was a national wrestling champion in Canada, and amateur wrestling was a big deal. I know you've said someone on the mat can control them, but it's been said that this man was a known shooter. So, anyway, let's get to the calls. We're going to start with PJ in San Francisco. PJ, what's going on?
Hey, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Is Eric on?
Eric will be on in just a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. I kind of had a question for him.
Okay. Well, hold on then.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to Chris in New York. Chris, what's going on? Hello.
He'll be up in a sec.
We are waiting.
There he is.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Hey, Chris,
okay.
how are you?
Well, one of these questions I'll ask you, and you can just pass it on to Bischoff if you want. I was watching an old tape.
Eric is... Hey, hold on. Eric
okay.
is on the line right now. Okay, Eric Bischoff's on the line right now. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dave. Thanks.
Okay, we actually have a caller on before we start with the intro and everything like that. Chris, why don't you start with Eric?
Hi.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good.
Great.
I was watching an old tape of WCW, not too old, but back from one of the War Games pay-per-views when you had the Raven Spock gimmick and Perry Saturn was breaking away from him and everything. Mm-hmm. And I was watching it, and the amount of support that Saturn had coming out of that angle was pretty overwhelming from what I had remembered. I was watching it, and I didn't realize the crowd was as behind him as they were. And then that's where they had the angle ensued where Kidman won the Cruiserweight title the next night. And I remember Saturn being really over. When he was coming out, he was getting some of the bigger pops as a face in the company. Mm-hmm. But then, after that, nothing was ever really done with him. He was putting a lot of, matches that didn't mean anything. He wasn't really putting any programs after that. Excuse me. And I was just wondering if, what's going to ensure that things like that don't happen as far as, in the future of WCW when a guy like that is making that kind of progress and looks to be right on the verge of becoming a name competitor for WCW, that, guys like that just don't get squashed for whatever reason, like he did at that time.
Well, I'm at a little bit of disadvantage because I'm not sure what show that was, and without looking at the tape and kind of putting it into the context of a time frame and everything else that was going on.
It was actually I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's when they also had the angle with you and Ric Flair, where Ric Flair reunited the Horsemen. Mm-hmm. It was that Nitro and the pay-per-view right before.
Okay, again though, in terms of what Perry was really involved in and who he was working with, I mean, it's your opinion that it wasn't anything that was really interesting. And I'll assume that you were correct, obviously. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I can say to you is that there's a lot of different ways to judge whether something is working or not. And, a talent's ability to interview, a talent's ability to work with a variety of different people and a variety of different styles effectively, to tell stories, are all things that determine whether or not, an individual moves into other more important programs. Perry is a friend of mine, so, I'm going to be, as gentle as I can when I say this, but, Perry got a pretty good reaction when he was with us. Perry, worked in and out of some angles. Some were successful, some were not. Perry has never kind of broken through either here or in the WWF. Never really broken through that kind of upper middle kind of category. And, who's to say whether it was the push he got or whether the push he's currently getting or whether or not he just hasn't been able to find the person that he's got the right chemistry with. In terms of, some kind of form of insurance as to how something will never happen again, chances are it probably will. We'll try to do everything we can to avoid it. We're certainly not in the business of trying to not promote talent, and we're certainly not in the business of trying not to promote interesting storylines. But at the same time, a talent's own limitations has a lot to do with that. And sometimes a guy can be getting over really, really well in a match or when he's involved in an angle that includes several other people. But when you put him out there on his own, it doesn't work. And then you just kind of move on and focus on the things that are.
Well, I just recall as far as, within that angle, whether it was because Raven was hated enough as a heel that, anybody going against him was going to get cheered or whatever the case was. I just know, the match he had the next night on Nitro was against Kendall Windham. And they actually had it was kind of a long, decent match, and then the angle ensued after that where he broke the flock away from everybody else. But it just seemed that after that, I remember that he just was in matches that had really no meaning and were just kind of squashes for him. Mm-hmm. But no angle involved. They were just, again, and the fact that I can't remember it and I guess that most people probably wouldn't remember it offhand just shows that for whatever reason, I'm not saying you or whoever was in charge, but it seemed like there was no effort put into putting into that next level.
That may seem like it's true, but over the past couple of years, that Perry had been involved with us, there were some very specific things that we tried to do with Perry quite frankly, some of it just didn't work, either because the concepts weren't that bad or for some other reason. In this one instance, perhaps you're absolutely correct, and he was kind of thrown into a situation that didn't have a lot of potential for success because there wasn't really an angle or a storyline in it, and perhaps, he just got left, on the wayside. But I can also say that, I remember being personally involved in a lot of attempts, or a number of attempts. I don't know if there was a lot of them, but there was certainly a number of them where we really tried to get Perry over. And, for whatever reason, it obviously didn't really work that well.
Okay, and my last question, and then I'll get off. And recently they were saying how Bill Goldberg had comments on the Bubba the Love Sponge show about he was going to be headed to he was considering going to the WWF, and that was an option and so forth. And I think everybody pretty much knows that this angle with him not being in WCW is just a work, and he's going to return soon. What reasoning would he have for starting a rumor like that about the competitors, where it would just add a little more fuel to them, where people that don't know any better might actually expect to see Bill Goldberg show up on Raw?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, and honestly, I never heard the interview. I kind of heard of the interview, so I don't know what Bill actually said or didn't say. I don't know what Bill was thinking when he did it. I certainly wasn't there, and I don't know what was in his mind at the time, but I agree that in general, and this isn't directly related to what Bill did or didn't do, because again, I didn't hear it, but in general, I think it's a bad idea for anybody to shoot their own angle that does anything but keep the attention on the company they're working for, or the storyline they're involved in, or the opponent that they're working with. Anything other than that is, at the very least, distracting, and in a worst case scenario, can actually work against you in a significant way. So, what was he thinking? I have no idea. But again, I didn't really hear the interview, so I can't comment beyond that general statement.
Yeah, I just think it would be best it's kind of like what Kevin Nash kept doing, where he kept mentioning Scott Hall.
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, and I got to tell you this, when I sat back, before I came back, this last time, it just drove me crazy to, listen to these people, shoot their own angles and go off in directions that really didn't have a payoff for the audience. It's one thing if you're going in a direction where there's going to be a payoff and it's going to be positive, and you're going to either have entertained or swerved or otherwise, taken the audience where you want them to be. But unless you have a plan and it's going to pay off, it's just, it gets ridiculous.
Yeah, for a while, Scott Hall was the most over personality in WCW. He wasn't even with the company, and pulling his picture out of a box was getting the biggest pop on the show.
Yeah, and without a payoff, it's kind of like, well, okay, great. You got a great reaction, now you can't pay it off, and, all you're going to do is disappoint people in the long run. And, look, we're trying to, we've, I think, gotten away from a lot of that. I mean, I don't think you've seen or heard those types of things other than, this one incident with Bill, whatever that was. In terms of what we're doing on the show, pretty much everything is centered around, focused on, what we're trying to achieve for each individual Nitro or Thunder or pay-per-view, and I don't think you're hearing as much of that kind of out of character or out of sequence kind of self-promotion or agenda setting.
Okay, yeah, I just hope, I'm sure you'll do whatever you can to keep that controlled, because in the long run it's just going to hurt the product. And
I think everybody realizes that, but again, you got to put yourself in, not that I'm justifying it, but, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, there was no direction, there was no control, there was no one person to answer to, there was no one person to give talent direction. It was pretty much of a free for all, and I think to a certain degree, guys are out there just entertaining themselves to keep their own sanity. Not that that's right, but I think that's what was going on.
Okay, and all right, that's about all I have. I'm sure Dave's going to touch on the cruiserweight situation with putting him in there with Scott,
Chris.
Scott Steiner and stuff. But okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye.
Okay, I want to start, Eric. There's been a lot of stuff talked about. Where exactly is the sale with Diffusion? Where does that stand as of right now? And right now, what can and can't the company do? Like, as far as are you kind of on hold with the ability to get new talent, or can you get new talent if you want it? But you're just kind of, or you're just holding up on your own, and and as far as changes, any kind of a timetable on some changes that we should expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions in there, but let me attack them one at a time if I can. In terms of where the sale is at or where the transaction is, it's not yet completed. I don't anticipate that it will be much before, the end of this month. It's a very complex kind of transaction. There's a lot of people involved, And, we hope that it's going to be done by, the end of February, first part of March, but it's a moving target, because there's a lot of people involved, because it's got to go through board approval, because it has to, get approval from even outside of Time Warner and Fusion. It has to get some other kind of regulatory approvals that are not going to be hard to come by. They're not hard to get, but it's a process that you have to go through. And to a certain degree, it's out of our hands. That being said, we hope, like I said, to finish it up by the end of this month or at the very latest, the first part of March. In terms of what we're able to do, very little at this point. And to be quite honest, we're not really able to hire talent to the degree that we want to. We're not able to go out and start launching or start creating new sets and new graphics. And there's a lot of things that we really can't do until this sale is completed. Imagine, if you were buying a house with the intention of remodeling it and selling it, not necessarily that our intention is to build WCW and turn around and sell it, but if you were just as an analogy to something that everybody can relate to, imagine that, you saved all your money, you were going to go buy a house, and your intention was to remodel that house. You may have put in a purchase agreement, you may have agreed to all the terms, but until that transaction is complete and the title has been changed and it's in your name and you are now the property owner and you've got your insurance in place and all the other things that go along with a property transaction, as simple as buying a house, you really can't go in and start knocking down walls and tearing roofs off and that type of thing. You've got to wait till you own it. And that's where we're at right now. We don't own WCW. The only thing that I'm doing right now, and, I'm in Arizona today, I'm not at Nitro, the only thing that I'm doing is trying to set the pieces in place in terms of the talent that is under contract so that when the time comes and knowing what I want to do, which in this case now is probably going to be the end of March or first part of April in terms of kind of relaunching stories and so forth, is to quit doing some of the ridiculous, stupid stuff that had been, being done for quite a while. Try to get back to basic, wrestling 101 kind of storytelling formulas, and get the talent that's been sitting on the bench that's perfectly able to work back on the show again. If you look back at Nitro a month ago or 2 months ago, Dustin Rhodes wasn't being used, Rick Steiner wasn't being used. There were a lot of people that that we had, and still some are, that are sitting on the sidelines because of injuries, that weren't being used, that need to start contributing. And that's what, we're trying to tell stories that allow us to do that. But in terms of, all the changes we want to make in terms of the show looking different, feeling different, having new writers come in to work with their existing staff to start really telling some compelling stories, we haven't been able to do any of that and probably won't be able to until, the sale actually happens, as I said earlier, which will hopefully be around the end of this month, first part of March. And then it's going to take us a period of 30 to 60 days of getting everybody together and saying, okay, this is the new direction, this is how we want to do it, let's start putting it together. And that was really the idea behind the dark period, was just so we had some time where we could spend, a couple weeks or a month creating and producing and listening to different ideas, so that when we did go back up, we come back up with a product that's as fresh as it can possibly be and different as it can possibly be from what's going on right now.
So are you able to sign any deals whatsoever, or is everybody that's coming in just pretty much verbal deals?
No, we can on a really limited basis. When I say we, I mean WCW. I guess that's still we to a certain degree, since I'm still kind of under contract with them. We let some people go last week. I think that's pretty obvious. Everybody's aware of that by now. And we're able to kind of replace dollar for dollar, so to speak. In other words, if there's $10 worth of talent that we cycle out, I can bring in $10 worth of talent, providing that it's not a long-term contract. That's kind of the situation that we're in right now. That's certainly not the position that I want to be in, and not the position we need to be in order to make the changes we need to make. But that's what I've got to work with right now, so I'm just doing the best we can with what we've got. It's easier for me to bring in guys, right now, like a Mike Modest, for example, and put him under an agreement when I'm able to find, people that are on the roster that aren't being used, or, it just isn't working out. I can cycle those people out and bring some others in. But in terms of big changes, we're really limited right now.
Now, as far as with ECW kind of disintegrating, what what can you do as far as picking guys up? And obviously the WWF has been very aggressive about signing the ECW guys before you have the option to make significant offers to them. I mean, are there people from there? I mean, obviously we know that you've talked with Carino. Are there people there that you would like to get? I don't know if it's Super Crazy or people like that, or is it just kind of one of those things where you're going to start really looking at them when you can make the move?
It doesn't make any sense right now to lead them along or to create the illusion that we're going to be able to kind of deal with them anytime soon. Again, I mean, if someone were to come to me, whether they're from ECW or anywhere else, and say, look, I'm free and clear, I'm not contractually obligated, I'm interested in working for your company, my answer is going to be, look, for the most part, my answer is going to be, okay, that's great, and I'd like to do business with you, but we're not going to be able to do a deal for another, 30 days. And if you want to wait 30 days so that we can start negotiating a deal with you, and you know that, you'll have a choice between whether our opportunity is better than an opportunity you can get somewhere else, great. But if you need to make a decision right now because you have to protect yourself and your family financially, thanks for your interest in us, and hopefully someday we're going to do business together, but we can't do it right now.
Last Monday on Nitro, there was a match that raised a lot of people's ire. It was Scott Steiner against the 4 cruiserweights, Jamie Noble, Evan Courageous, and the Young Dragons, who had just come off having a super match on the first pay-per-view when you came back. And it was like a 4-on-1 squash. And what were the thoughts of you or whoever put that on? As far as it really, I thought it really damaged the future as far as the cruiserweight division. In that you saw these guys, they really did a good match on the pay-per-view. Kind of nothing had gone on with them since then, and then they were like fed to this guy who like ate them up in 3 minutes.
Yeah. I was actually pretty disappointed when I saw that, and I wasn't at last Monday's Nitro either. I had to be in another city, but I did get a chance to watch it. And I was involved in the planning of that originally, and I was disappointed when I saw it on television because it didn't come off the way it was planned and the way it was supposed to have been executed. The idea of looking back at that show, of course, is, Kevin Nash, the week before that, if you go back to a week before last Monday night show, of course, Ric Flair was doing everything he could to put Kevin Nash in a situation where the deck was stacked against him, making him work handicap matches and things like that. Well, last Monday, that situation reversed itself, and Kevin Nash was in control of the situation and was able to then put Scott Steiner in a compromised situation where the deck was going to be stacked against him. That was the reason for the 3 matches. It was supposed to start out with a 4-on-1 cruiserweight match, then go to DDP, and then, of course, end up with Kevin Nash. What was supposed to have happened is Kevin was supposed to go to the 4 guys and say, look, don't worry about beating Scott Steiner. I'll take care of Scott Steiner at the end of the night. All I want you to do is blow that big bastard up. Excuse the language. Blow that big son of a gun up. And in that case, that's where the cruiserweights should have been used effectively. In other words, they should have worked a pace in a match that would have had Steiner at a disadvantage and would have forced Steiner to kind of chase them. And that would have enhanced, I think, the perception of what cruiserweights can do and how they work against big guys. That was the idea. Similar to the idea that when we had 2 cruiserweights working against Animal, I think the week before that. That was a situation where I think the cruiserweight style, it kind of advanced the storyline and it helped. Unfortunately, in the execution, Scott just ate the guys up, which was not supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to try to beat Scott. They were supposed to blow him up. And like I said, in the execution, that story didn't get told, and consequently, I think that you're right. Obviously, you're right. They were eaten up, and what's worse than that is that I don't think it did anything for Scott. It didn't enhance his character or his story, and it certainly didn't do anything for the cruiserweights. So I was just as disappointed as everybody else when I saw that.
Now, with the thing earlier in the show with Flair and everything, there's something made. I mean, I know a lot of people really, the Flair situation. It's kind of weird because we got the analogies of Willie Mays in his last season watching Flair on Monday night, and everyone's watched Flair. He's kind of an institution on TBS wrestling, for over 20 years actually, and a lot of the older audience, grew up with him, especially in certain parts of the country. And, babyface heel, he's been through everything. But he really looked, part of it is he is old. And he looked old because he looked old, which and out of shape, which he normally doesn't look out of shape. And then just the way he was begging off and everything it was just very sad to watch. And I think that a lot of people were real uncomfortable. And I know a lot of Ric Flair fans were kind of like, okay, we don't even want to watch Ric Flair anymore if it's like this.
Well, okay, but here's the truth, and here's the reality. Ric Flair is 50 years old. And if you're a Ric Flair fan, here's the choice. You either find a character role that Ric Flair can be involved in, where you get all the good things that you get with Rick in terms of his mic skills and the fact that people know who he is and all of that, or you don't use him anymore because you're not going to put Ric Flair in a situation where he's wrestling every week. Ric Flair doesn't want to be in that situation. That's not Eric Bischoff determining what's best or what's not best for Ric Flair. Ric Flair himself doesn't want to wrestle anymore. He looks the way he's 50 years old, for crying out loud. To try to use Ric Flair in a way other than in a CEO kind of a position or in a mastermind, if you will, kind of position, whatever you want to call that, I'm just not sure there's another way to effectively use Rick. Rick is best when he plays that over-the-top kind of Norman Bates, out-of-control, dirtiest player in the game role. That's what he's most comfortable in. And, I think everybody's just trying to use Rick in a way that Rick is, A, comfortable in and has a chance of doing a really good job at. But in terms of the diehard Ric Flair fans who look at him like Babe Ruth, all I can say is, hey, guys, this isn't really sports. This really is entertainment, and we're trying to use Rick in a way that, he's most effective in.
I think he kind of got a problem with Flair in that he wants to do that role, but nobody really wants to see him do that.
Well, I don't know. It got a pretty good reaction out of the crowd. Ric Flair has been, stacking the deck against Kevin Nash and DDP for a couple of weeks now. And, when I watched the show, for the first time in I don't know how long, I saw WCW Nitro open up and people at ringside were all standing and reacting. So, that's how I judge whether or not it worked. If people would have been sitting on their hands and not paying attention the way they have over the last couple of months, I would tend to agree with you. But by looking at the emotion and the reaction that Ric Flair and Kevin Nash were able to create, as evidenced by the audience's reaction, I'd say it was pretty effective. And perhaps some people in North Carolina that are hardcore, Ric Flair fans that would like to see him win the title one more time, perhaps they didn't enjoy it, but the people at ringside sure seem to.
I think the thing with Flair is because he knows all the little tricks about being a heel. He can do it, but it kind of makes people sad to see it because it's kind of like, when I see Perro Aguayo in Mexico or someone, it's like when a guy's that old, even like a football player, Jimmy Connors at the end in tennis, who was always kind of a heel, but by the time you get to a certain age and you kind of see them as that underdog, it's like you really don't want to boo a guy that you've seen for 20 years, even if they're a good heel, because you get that familiarity thing going. And Rick, I know, likes to be a heel, but it's just like, he's got to fight every night to get people to boo him, because it's not that what they all kind of have that sympathetic thing for him.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, in large part, and I think I may have said this to you in our last conversation, I wasn't involved or didn't have any influence over WCW at all when they decided to make Ric Flair the CEO. In fact, the day that happened, the night that happened, when I saw it on television, I cringed because I knew, you can't just make something go away. And, Ric Flair in that position, it's hard to tell stories that way, with Ric Flair as a babyface. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. You're swimming upstream when you're trying to get people to boo a guy like Ric Flair because they just don't want to. He's been around too long. But, we're doing the best we can with the cards that were dealt to us in the beginning. And I think as the story continues to unfold into March and April and hopefully into May, it'll all, it'll make sense. But, we were dealt the cards we were dealt, and we're doing the best we can with, the stories that we've got and with the talent that we're using right now.
Going back to the cruiserweights real quick, I know you were talking about last time you were on the show, really wanting to do something with that division. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to someone today that said that you were thinking about maybe doing a women's division, but with women that could actually really wrestle as opposed to just having just girls everywhere around ringside and trying to maybe train fitness models or something like that. Were you actually thinking of doing that, or is that maybe a plan for the future, or is that just totally...
Well, I mean, I think that that's a conversation that's been had, a number of times over the last year or two. I mean, everyone knows that we've got to figure out something to do with women other than, the gratuitous, stupid stuff that, has been done over the last year, which quite obviously didn't work. And there are different people with different ideas, and we're going to continue to explore that. But I don't think, a women's division, if you will, is anything that's going to happen anytime soon. Going back to the cruiserweight division, that's definitely a work in progress. I mean, what you see now is certainly not what I hope to do and what I intend to do and what we will do, in the months to come. The most I can do right now is get my hands on as many good cruiserweights as there are out there, and start developing, some new ones. And that's, kind of the process that we're in right now.
Have you had any conversations with, like, Ultimo Dragon or anybody?
No, I hope to very soon. He's a guy that I had a great relationship with when he was here, and I know through a third party, I know there's interest on his part, and there's certainly interest on my part. I'm hoping to go to Japan sometime in March for about 4 days, and I'm sure I'll get hooked up with him then.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any talk or interest as far as in Road Dogg?
No, I was just reading that. As I was waiting for your call, I jumped on the internet and I see that everybody's reporting that he signed a deal or will be signing a deal, and there is no deal. There will be no deal anytime in the near future between WCW and the wrestler formerly known as Road Dogg in the WWF. So I will put an end to those rumors tonight. He won't be on the show. He does not have a deal. I've never even had a conversation with him about it. The closest I've gotten to a conversation is someone approached me and said, would you be interested? And my response was, sure, as soon as he gets himself cleaned up, takes care of his personal problems. Obviously, the reason he left the WWF was because of his personal issues, and I don't think jumping right from the WWF and coming to WCW is the best way for him to solve those problems. So until that situation is cleaned up and there's some assurances that he's not going to have the same problems here, I'm really not interested.
What's the status as far as I know, like there's a lot of lawsuits out against WCW. Sonny Ono, I guess, probably the most publicized one, who's someone who you've known forever, I guess. What when you take over the company, is Time Warner the ones that are involved with the lawsuit, and are you basically washing your hands? Are your hands washed of it, or is it both?
I mean,
or is
those
it just...
lawsuits are against Turner, Time Warner, and they have nothing to do with what we're going to be doing with WCW after the date of closing. Those will continue to be a Turner, Time Warner issue and really won't have anything to do with us.
Okay, let's go to the calls. Let's go to Sean in Nashville. Sean, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey.
Going good.
Hey, Eric. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks.
Hey, I got my Super Bowl ticket, so I hope I'm not wasting my money.
I don't think you are.
But anyways, like I said, though, I'm a guy who still watches all the shows and buys pay-per-views, so I'm still spending my money on WCW, even though it's not much of a product. And so I hope I don't come off like an asshole, but I want WCW to succeed as much as anyone. But I was just wondering, like, how old is too old for the wrestlers? Because I think we all know, like, we'll probably be seeing Hogan again, and guys like Nash still on top, and. I just like to compare it to, like, let's say if you were, like, the owner of the Los Angeles Lakers. I mean, would you want, to have a bunch of old guys like Magic and Byron Scott out there, or would you want Shaq and Kobe out there? And I don't know, how old is too old, for the wrestlers? I mean, when do you say, this guy's,
Well, there is no magic formula. Let me first say that, number one, you're assuming that Hogan is going to come back to WCW, and I've said this before. I'll say it again. I hope he does, and it's my intention that he will. But it's not a foregone conclusion by any stretch at this point. That's number one. Number two, in terms of how old is too old, it depends on the talent's ability to generate interest in the audience. I was reading in something that was very interesting in the USA Today. It was a column about, David Stern and the NBA and the problems that professional basketball was having. And, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that are wrong with the NBA, but one of the things that's wrong with the NBA are there's no stars, so there's no talent, if you will, no stars, no athletes that people give a damn about. And it's not how high someone can jump and how fast they are or how young they are. I would say to you that right now, probably one of the most valuable faces in the NBA in some respects, not every respect, is Karl Malone, because he's a guy that the audience knows and cares about, and he can still perform. And they make jokes about him being way too old, but he's still one of the top performers in the NBA. When Michael Jordan left, when Dennis Rodman left, the real characters in the NBA left. The controversy left, and so did people that anybody gave a damn about. Nobody cares about the athlete, just because of his age. And, look, wrestling is not a performance-based, athletically-based event in the sense that it's how fast you can run or how high you can jump. If I was managing an NBA team or an NFL team, certainly that would become a consideration because it's nothing but performance-based. But when you're talking about a business like wrestling, that's a lot more like The Sopranos than it is like an NBA game. The question of how old is too old relates to a talent's ability to register with the audience. And there's a point where you no longer can, and we know that. We just got done talking about Ric Flair. Now it's incumbent upon us to find a way to use Ric Flair in a way that's still interesting for the audience and still takes advantage of what Ric Flair is without necessarily putting him in the ring and asking him to perform physically on a nightly basis. The emphasis is going to be on new, young, fresh, aggressive talent. But that doesn't mean that you're going to take all of your established talent, regardless of their age, and set them off to the side. I think Vince Russo and WCW tried that, and the only thing that crashed TV without established talent was the ratings, the brand. It crashed dramatically, and didn't start reviving itself even the slightest until some of those more established names came back. But you got to be careful how you use them. Will you see, if Hogan does come back, will you see him wrestling in pay-per-views, every pay-per-view? Absolutely not. Will you see him wrestling in, main event matches on Nitro every night? Absolutely not. Will we try to create a role that makes sense for a character like Hogan and take advantage of what that brand name and what that individual brings? Absolutely we will, but not at the expense of younger talent. The emphasis, I'll say it again, I'll say it 1,000 times, the emphasis is going to be on the Sean O'Hares of the world, if you will.
Okay. I was wondering, did you see the Joan London special
No.
last week at all?
No.
Okay. Because I was just wondering, cause since you're going to be a guy, with a lot of power in WCW, it's they interviewed Kevin Nash, and, he said that his favorite part of wrestling was every 2 weeks when he gets paid and that he could wake up and roll out of bed and do his stuff. And, I don't know. It just, for me as a fan, I don't want to spend money for a pay-per-view for a guy who's going to be in a main event that, admittedly, doesn't give 100%.
Well, I don't know when that interview was done, and I know. First of all, let me say I agree with your feelings about that. And every time I've heard interviews that sounded like that, I cringe, because that apathetic, I don't give a damn attitude is not, what the audience wants to hear. It's everything you just said. I won't repeat it. But at the same time, if you look at Kevin Nash over the last 30 days or 45 days, just in his physical appearance, you have to be watching closely, and I'm not going to tell you what I see, but if you're watching closely, this is a guy who's all of a sudden taking his role and his position much more seriously. If you watch what he does in the ring, he's taking his position and his role much more seriously. He's much more aggressive, and he's lost that lackadaisical kind of ambivalent attitude that he's had for a couple of months. So, again, I don't want to make excuses for him, but, I don't know when that interview with Joan London was done. I would tell you, based on the conversations I've had with Kevin over the last 30 days, he's a lot more like Kevin Nash from, 1996 than he is like, Big Sexy who would rather, stay home and drink a beer than come to work.
What did you think of the Ming situation that happened at the Royal Rumble, and also what did you think about them putting a title on a guy who wasn't under contract and how something like that could slip?
First of all, I was happy for Ming. First and foremost, a guy like Ming who has always been a professional. He's always been easy for me to work with. He's always been personable. He's always been, he's always put in 100%. And the truth is, WCW had him under a nightly deal, which meant that he maybe worked one night a week, and it wasn't for an amount of money that he was going to be able to support his family on. So, the fact that he got, and quite frankly, I wouldn't have offered him or been able to offer him anything that would have ensured that he was going to be able to take care of his family to the extent that he needs to. So for him personally, I was happy for him because now he's got a deal and he'll be able to take care of his obligations. On the other hand, I was incredibly disappointed that anybody's wrestling on our television show in any meaningful role whatsoever that isn't under a long-term contract. To me, that's just sleeping at the wheel, and it just, is typical of everything that's gone wrong, with WCW in the past year and a half. And I was more than a little bit upset that was allowed to happen. But I don't blame Ming. Certainly someone, at the WWF saw an opportunity. I would have probably done the same thing if I was them. So I don't blame them for doing it, certainly, and I don't blame Ming for taking the opportunity. I just think it was, stupidity and short-sightedness on WCW's part. But at the end of the day, a week from now, I don't think anybody will remember. Ultimately, it's not going to have any impact on us, and I don't think it really, it really matters, as long as it doesn't happen again.
Situation. I want to mention real quick that the NBA All-Star Game did a 6.9 rating on the overnights last night, which is down from an 8.3 the previous year. One of the things that we've noticed is whether it be NBA, a lot of football, sports in general, ratings of sports in the last year have taken a tumble. And I think a lot of it is due to the fact that teenagers are not, we've talked about this on the show all the time, teenagers are really not watching sports. The older fans that are into sports are still into sports. And there's something missing in the connection that when I was a teenager and when Eric Bischoff was a teenager that people had, and it's clearly not there. That's why the WWF has in many ways filled that void as, the athletic superstars of the teenagers. I mean, when I know that, I live with teenagers and everything, it's like Tony Hawk and it's The Rock, and it's not the local football players, or certainly not the baseball players, and there's the mainstream sports, your baseball, your football, your basketball, as far as television goes, certainly baseball more than the other ones, I think, are really going to be in for a rough go in the next 5 years, I think. I don't know, Eric, you got any thoughts on that?
I think you're right. One of the things that when I've talked to people about this, I think free agency, quite honestly, has hurt professional sports in general, whether it's baseball, football, or basketball, in the sense that, the local market, which is so dependent upon, their sport, you don't get a chance to relate to. You talk about when I was young, growing up in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, I moved around a lot, but you had the same players in a market over an extended period of time. And whether the team was winning or losing, you developed a relationship with those players, and you cared about them one way or the other. And you lose that now. A player, generally speaking, players aren't in a market long enough to develop a relationship with the community. Most of the time they don't live in the community that they play in or the team that they play for. Teams are now moving. I still can't get myself to say Phoenix Cardinals or St. Louis Rams. I mean, I got to really think about it. Because not only are players moving all over the place and losing a relationship with the audience, but teams are moving all over the place and losing their relationship with the audience, and people have become ambivalent. They just don't care about it anymore. I think free agency is a big, big part of it. And I think the game itself is a part of it. One of the things that I think the XFL was trying to capture, and unfortunately I don't think they have, is, doing things that allow the sports fan to care about a character. And, in the NFL, for example, I've had friends of mine that played in the NFL, they talk about fining you if you wear your socks too high. It's all about the game. I think that's one of the things that's going wrong with the NBA. It's great for a basketball purist, but there's no entertainment value in the product any longer, or very little, that the audience cares about, and that's what's missing between that and the free agency situation.
Were you surprised that Vince McMahon went to more of a straight football product and less entertainment than, I don't know, I probably thought he would, and in doing so, clearly he got that great first week rating with a wrestling audience, and they didn't come back?
Yeah, I'm disappointed because, I went on record months ago as saying, or, when I first heard about the XFL, I've said to everybody that's asked me that I think it's a great idea and I think it'll work, and as I sit here today, I hope it'll work. I hope they solve their problems, but unfortunately, I have to say that the best part of the XFL was the promotion and the hype leading up to it. I thought it was really, really done well, and obviously it was effective. Unfortunately, as I was watching the game, I kept thinking, wow, this is kind of like, a level above high school football. And most importantly, it didn't live up to the hype. When you talk about smash mouth football, and you talk about, going back to football the way it used to be played, and then you deliver a product that's, substantially less than a marginal college game, in fact, quite a bit less than a marginal college game, and only slightly more than an okay high school game, and that doesn't deliver, the promises that you made about it, people were let down. But, it's a new effort, and I think they're going to find their way, and I still think it's going to be successful. I hope it's going to be successful.
I want to mention one thing before we get back to Eric, that we had a question earlier about Lita on Off the Record. It's not going to be a one-on-one with Michael Landsberg. It's going to be Thursday on Off the Record at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be part of a panel discussion, so just want to clear that up. You dropped several women from the roster last week. Some of the women were not dropped. Stacy Keebler, Medusa, Ms. Jones. Are there any reasons as far as and Medeja as well? Are there any reasons as far as who made the cut, who didn't make the cut, and as far as thoughts as far as re-signing Tori Wilson, or was it just a question of the price being too high? And what's your thoughts on women in wrestling right now?
Well, I really don't want to comment on why we cut certain people. That's really not fair or necessary at this point. Suffice it to say, we're looking at the roster, and that was, there are going to be more cuts, and there are going to be some additions. But you get to the point where you got to say, okay, what's a person contributing now? What can they potentially contribute in terms of a storyline? Does it make sense right now, or does it not make sense right now? And, that was the process going in. It's not a reflection on anybody's talent or anybody's potential in the future, but just right now for what we need under the conditions we have to work within, certain people, got targeted for an initial cut. And there may be more cuts, going into the future, both men and women. But, we had to start somewhere, and that's where we started. In terms of, the future for women, as I, discussed earlier, I think there's a role for women, but, the gratuitous, kind of bad imitation of what WWF was trying to do or did do successfully, in 98, 99 in terms of the TNA component, doing a bad version of that is just not what I want to do. I was embarrassed to see it. It was done poorly. It obviously didn't have the impact that everybody thought it was going to have or hoped that it was going to have. People just don't want to watch it. So, if I'm going to use women, I want to use women in a meaningful, positive role, not just coming out, full of silicone and wearing as little as possible and doing, bad imitations of poor wrestling.
Is there any thoughts as far as using Mark Arena Mero?
Not really. I haven't had any conversations with either one of them. Last time I saw Mark, I think we used him for a brief period of time, or we were going to use him for a brief period of time with Rena, but it didn't work out. I don't think Mark really wants to get back in the business. I don't think his heart is in it. When he was in WCW, he thought he was going to be a star, and he was very frustrated with me in the sense that I didn't see the same thing.
Look.
Uh-oh.
Oh. Okay, all right. We'll get him back in just a second. Let me just go through this. We already talked about the Haku situation. Just want to remind everyone that this week we're going to have Honky Tonk Man on Wednesday. We're going to have Rick Bassman on Thursday, so those will be our next guests. We also have Lou Thez scheduled for Monday of next week. In fact, on the website right now, Lou Thez kind of has an article. Tom Zink's got an article up on the website. It's been quite an interesting week when it comes to that type of stuff.
I hadn't heard anything about Lou Thesz's new book until you mentioned it.
What would you say, Brian?
I hadn't heard anything about Lou Thesz's new book until you mentioned it.
It's the same book. I think they're kind of. I mean, there may be some updates to it. In fact, we'll talk to him about it on Monday.
But like a reissue?
It's being reissued. I think there's going to be some updates and some changes from the original book. I'm not positive of that though.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote something on his favorite 25 greatest wrestlers in his opinion, which certainly will stir a lot of controversy up on the website. But I mean, it's an interesting read about some of the guys from way back that none of us have actually ever seen, but may have heard of their names.
It was very interesting. And I scrolled up and down about 15 times looking for Ric Flair's name, and it was. And
it wasn't there. It was not there. Nor was nor was Inoki, for that matter.
Yeah.
Or Hulk Hogan.
Well, I can understand it's maybe like I don't know. I would not have put Hulk Hogan on that list.
Okay. Well, it depends on what you consider great. The whole term of greatest wrestler is so weird because
what does that mean?
What does it mean exactly? Because he's got Gorgeous George not on the list of greatest wrestlers but greatest performers. Okay, Gorgeous George was but should Hogan be there? Should, obviously, I don't know, to me, any list that doesn't have like a Ric Flair, that's...
Yeah, especially if it's greatest performer.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty tough. And I think that one of the main topics we got on the emails is still about the cruiserweights. And I think that a lot of people, obviously you've heard this from many people as far as, want to see the cruiserweights. It's one thing that you can do that WWF apparently won't do. So it's again, it requires educating people to something that hasn't really been seen, because smaller guys, in Japan and Mexico have been a big deal, but traditionally not in the United States. One of the things I think that needs to be done, because so many of your really talented cruiserweights like Rey Mysterio Jr. and Jamie Noble, Shannon Moore, these are really small guys, especially compared to the big guys that you've got, some of the heavyweights, as far as the top heavyweights, like Lex Luger or Kevin Nash, who's gigantic. And by mixing them, one of the problems is it just shows everyone just how tiny some of these guys are, but if they work with each other, exclusively with each other, I don't think that it's as noticeable. And I think that one of the things that really hurt Rey Mysterio is if you see him against, even though him and the Wall had something on Thunder that I thought was actually pretty entertaining, just seeing them standing there, it just sort of like you can't take Rey Mysterio Jr. seriously. You go, wait a minute, this guy, is so little. And I think that, but if he was working with like a Shannon Moore, it's just like two guys who are the same size that are giving you an entertaining match. And I think one of the problems with WWF and WCW with why these guys can't get over is because, they're put in there with big guys, and then to have any kind of believability, it's not like they can hold their own with the big guys. I mean, like a Scott Steiner against any of those guys individually, so to speak. And it kind of destroys the division. And I think that, something's got to be done to keep these guys within their own thing and get them going on their own, as opposed to, having them wrestle entertaining matches with each other, and then they go in there with a heavyweight and they're kind of like exposed. Kind of like, just an example, like in a boxing, you don't see Oscar De La Hoya or Felix Trinidad fighting a heavyweight, because they would never draw again once people saw how actually easily a mediocre heavyweight could beat a guy who's 60 pounds smaller than them in many cases.
Yeah, and it's a unique position, because I listen to people talk all the time about, it's one thing to have cruiserweights, but if you ever really want them to get over, you've got to mix them in, to storylines with some of the bigger guys, and there's different ways of looking at it. But I think you hit on it when you said it's an education process. Granted, this isn't boxing, but I think when the cruiserweight division is established the way it should be, and people get with the cruiserweight division, and the cruiserweight guys consistently work cruiserweight style matches, and we're still not quite there yet. We're there in many respects, but when the audience really understands the difference between a cruiserweight and that style and a heavyweight, then I think there will be an opportunity to have a match where you can have a Chavo Guerrero or Rey Mysterio or Shane Helms work with a bigger, not necessarily a Kevin Nash certainly, but work with a bigger opponent, and you have those contrasting styles. And, I think you can do it eventually, but we certainly, we're not there yet. And I'll go back to what I talked about earlier. If in that match last week where the four cruiserweights would have worked their style and would have achieved what they should have achieved, which is to blow Scott Steiner up and be so fast and so devastating and work in combination the way they have the capability to, where, there's no way Scott could have been able to keep up with him the way he needed to. If that presentation would have been there the way it should have been, I think it would have complemented the cruiserweight style. But, we're not there yet. We're certainly not there. It's a work in progress. It's an education. The cruiserweights themselves, some of the younger guys have to understand the psychology. And then I think eventually, you can mix them, but, certainly it's real difficult right now.
This is from Sam Nord, who says, what role do you see in today's WCW for Kevin Nash, Lex Luger, Rick Steiner, and those kind of wrestlers? In other words, wrestlers who were big stars at one point in their career, but are clearly living off of their names. I think the problem I have as a viewer is I really enjoyed watching all of these guys at one point in my life, but not for the past several years. Compared to the WWF, it seems like WCW is pushing dinosaurs while the WWF pushes stars that seem like stars of now. And what can you do to get rid of WCW's reputation as being the promotion filled with the wrestlers who were 5 to 10 years past their prime? That is a big perception problem. It's not to me, it's not any of the old guys in specific, although there's some guys who are good and some aren't, is that there is that perception that WCW is the older group, and you got to nix that perception somehow to turn this thing around and make WCW the younger group and make the other group and Steve Austin seem stale, if you know what I'm saying. Just like Steve Austin may have made, somebody else seem stale 3 years ago.
It's all about perception, and there's really only one way to change it, and that's to go out, as I said last time we talked on your show, to go out, find that younger talent, develop it, build it, promote it, advance it, and put a focus on it. But, it's not like there's, 200 guys out there ready to go to work tomorrow. That's a long-term process. It's a rebuilding process here, people. This is something that's going to take a long time. But in the interim, you've got to use guys like Kevin Nash, for example, to help guys like Sean O'Hare get to the point where they need to be. You simply cannot put, much like they used Steve Austin to get The Rock over. Vince McMahon used himself to get Steve Austin over. It's a balancing act, and to a certain degree, a juggling act. You can't do one without the other. You can't get young talent over without more established talent, to aid and assist. But the first thing you have to do is go out there and find it and create it and develop it, and that's what we're in the process of doing. But it's not going to happen overnight.
What's the status of the shutdown? Is that pretty much on the rocks?
That's a good question. My intention was originally to go dark after the February 18th pay-per-view, but due to a series of complications, primarily due to the fact that we're not going to own this company until after February 18th, Turner did not want us to go dark because of commitments that they had previously made to advertisers, and I understand that, and it's reasonable. So we're probably not going to go dark now until sometime in April, and that'll probably be, and again, this is a moving target, but it'll probably be April 2nd.
So you do still plan to do a shutdown?
Oh yeah, we still plan to do a shutdown, but you can't shut something down until you own it.
Yeah.
And we're not going to own it in enough time to shut it down February 18th.
And the plan would just be the one shutdown for 3-4 weeks, whatever it would be, and then you would come back with, a facelift, so to speak.
Yeah, we'd come back with a facelift going into that May 6th pay-per-view.
Okay. And the May 6th pay-per-view is kind of like targeted to be like a real big deal, right? Bigger deal than...
It will be a real big deal. In terms of what we're going to do to promote it and market it and the way we're going to try to build it and the stories going into it, yeah, it is going to be a big deal.
Okay, let's go to Robert in Maryland. Robert, you're next up.
Oh, yeah, good evening to everybody. Mr. Bischoff, actually, Dave has taken most of the things I wanted to say about the cruiserweights, but, everyone talks about, like the older guys or whatever, and we've been talking about one-on-one matches between, Kevin Nash and a Rey Mysterio, but what about tag team matches mixing certain heavyweights and certain cruiserweights, such as, like a Lance Storm maybe with a Elix Skipper versus, Chavo Guerrero with a wrestler who's not necessarily, over 260 pounds and building off of that?
Well, I mean that's a good idea, and that certainly could work, and that could, sometimes at some point that could be a match. But I don't think that's going to necessarily, or that match or that kind of approach is necessarily going to get the cruiserweights over. What's going to get the cruiserweights over is a definitive cruiserweight division first and foremost. Important storylines, not just matches for the sake of having matches. But there was one, and I have to admit I wasn't watching that closely over the past 6 months or so. But somebody told me that the Young Dragons worked with the same opponents for like 6 straight months.
With Young Dragon 3 count.
Yeah, that's just the sake of having matches for the sake of having matches. For the cruiserweight division, there's a lot of things that need to happen and will happen, but it has to be a very well-defined division with talent that has the kind of marketing and promotion and effort put behind it in the ring and outside of the ring as well. The belt itself has to be made important. I think the idea of having cruiserweight tag team belts is probably a great idea because it lends itself to the style and the energy that the cruiserweight division brings to it. Those are all things, and there's more of them, but those are the types of things that will make the cruiserweight division important. I think bringing wrestlers in from Mexico, in Japan, on a semi-regular basis is another thing that will make it an important deal. I think, showing footage from New Japan, for example, in their junior heavyweight tournament, I think is something that will help broaden the awareness of the cruiserweight division and make it different and unique in the sense that it stands out from everything else that's going on in WCW. And by being unique, I think that will help get it over. But it's all of those things together. It's not any one thing.
Right. And when you are, ultimately in charge, I mean, will there be an end to this atmosphere, or at least what we hear about, where people seem to be afraid to speak up if there's a bad idea put on the table, and go through with it, and regardless of like how the ratings are tanking, will there be an avenue for people to speak up and say, maybe this isn't a good idea, like a Johnny Ace, for example, with his experience in All Japan, will he have free reign to say what he wants to?
Well, I mean, I'm already working pretty closely with Johnny Ace, and there's one of the reasons that I'm not at Nitro tonight, and I didn't go last week, although last week was a scheduling issue. This week was by choice. I simply wanted a chance to watch the show from home as opposed to watching it on a little monitor, in a small office backstage. But more than anything else, I wanted Johnny and the people that are working with Johnny to have an opportunity to start, coming up with their own ideas and solving some of their own problems. And, one of the things I learned in, my last stint as president of WCW, I tended to try to do everything myself. And that's not a great way to run a business.
Right.
I want to delegate. I want there to be an opportunity for people who, if they have ideas, and I said this in one of the talent meetings I had several weeks ago to all of the talent that was there, if they have ideas and they want to discuss those ideas, I certainly want them to do it, and I want them to go through the proper channels. But there's also a certain point when we make a decision, and we're the ones that have the responsibility of planning and executing, the overall plan. There comes a point where somebody has to say, okay, great, I like your idea, but, unfortunately it's not going to work. Here's what you need to do. And then it's up to the talent to do that. This isn't creative by committee necessarily, although there's 2 or 3 or 4 people right now currently involved in that process.